The toilet and what we do there is our basic need about the same as food, but unlike food the toilet is spoken aloud much less. It's like everyone is afraid to talk about it. Just listen to the name of this process, departure of natural needs. It's like reading a protocol of an administrative offense. But on the topic of feces and toilets there are a lot of jokes. There is even a whole direction among comedians which is named toilet humor. And this is quite the official name of the humorous genre. It seems as if it is still embarrassing to talk about toilets and their filling, all the more ashamed to speak seriously, as if our intelligence is immediately evaporating. It's easier to joke by sending video about a fun trip through the rectum or a stool strike to WhatsApp. But in the next 20-odd minutes constraint and complexes will remain on the sidelines. This I promise you. So why are we so ashamed to go to the toilet? Why if we go to the restroom while visiting we always turn on the water in the sink so that no one overhears our natural process? My name is Fred Maximoff. This is a case 3094. A story of great shame. Nowadays. For a long time popular culture was afraid of the theme of the toilet. For example, in the 70s sitcom, The Brady Family, the main characters go to the bathroom, where there is no toilet. In those days showing toilets on the screen was considered completely unethical. It may sometimes seem to us that people have always been embarrassed and ashamed of excrement, but this is self-deception. Naturally our distant ancestors in mammoth skins did not care about such trifles. But here's what's interesting. In the following periods of our history, too, no one was embarrassed by bowel movements. For example, in ancient Greece rich people used pots that their slaves carried out, and then the poor would collect this excrement and use it as fertilizer for their vegetable gardens. In our days of pissing in somewhere in the middle of the street are up in bad taste. But in antiquity they would not even pay attention to this. Indeed, in times such street defecation was part of everyday life. No one paid attention to the presence of outsiders directly during this process. Is it really possible that our ancestors were more immoral than us? Not really, they just saw themselves differently. In Greece and Rome the cult of the body was developed. If you go to the gallery of ancient sculptures, then all the sculptures of people there are presented naked in the form of warriors, gods and heroes of the Olympic Games. For an ancient person the material shell is not something that needs to be hidden, but rather a beautiful temple. If your inner world is beautiful, then your body will be just as amazing. How can human shit be vile under such conditions? As the Roman thinker Lucius Annaeus Seneca wrote in his works, what is natural is not ugly. Sometimes defecation was part of spiritual enlightenment. Ancient Greek theaters even had special stone seats with holes in the middle. The holders of privileges occupied these places and during the performance they could be cleansed both spiritually and physically. But the first changes in people's attitude towards their waste products will be brought about by Christianity. There is a passage in the Old Testament that literally describes what a man should do with his excrement. And it sounds like this.
You must have a place outside the camp to go and relieve yourself. And you must have a digging tool in your equipment so that when you relieve yourself you can dig a hole and cover up your excrement. For the Lord your God walks throughout your camp to protect you and deliver your enemies to you. Your camp must be holy, lest he see anything unclean among you and turn away from you.
Do you already feel the context and the difference in attitude towards a person compared to ancient Greece? For the Christian God your obscenities are unacceptable. If you do not keep your distance from impurities, then God can easily turn away from you. And this is exactly the moment an embarrassment is born and when shame is born for one's bowel movements. This feeling can be described as follows. If this is disgusting to higher powers, then why shouldn't it be disgusting to me? Anthropologist Ernest Becker wrote that there are two psychological states that we humans have. It is the denial of death and the difficulty in accepting the physical limitations of our body. Defecation clearly belongs to the second. Working with these states is at the heart of most ideologies and religions. They give not only faith in life after death, but also the conviction that a beautiful world where a person is immortal or omnipotent can come to earth. In almost all religions the body is mortal, but the soul is infinite. But what then is the peculiarity of Christianity? The body is perceived as the source of sin and everything carnal bears its traces. In the first place is the soul and the processes of salvation of that very soul. Not surprisingly, for many hermits bodily dirt was often a virtue. Christening was supposed to cleanse the Christian once and for all, literally and figuratively. And defecation instantly became embarrassing. After all, this is an indicator that our body is not perfect. But if it came to the vicegerents of God on earth, that is tsars and kings, then the rhetoric turned 180 degrees. These people are so close to God that no one could even think that they also go to the toilet. For example, in 1740 the Russian secret office received a denunciation of the peasant Grigory Karpov. What was the fault of the poor peasant? As it turned out, he allowed himself to call Empress Anna Ivanovna a woman who, like everyone else, eats bread, peas and poops. It is not known exactly how the authorities then punished this peasant, but the very fact that, for the words about the defecation of the Empress, they could condemn a person speaks volumes. There may be a false illusion that the era of enlightenment in Europe, which made antiquity fashionable again, was to drown in the cesspool the shame of going to the toilet. But things only got worse. The number of taboos has grown. And then the master class was shown by Victorian England. It was believed that a woman should always be a real lady. Men also needed a lot of endurance. The excretions of the body were the subject of terrible shame. In these circumstances, self-control and equanimity became the main tools to hide the natural needs of one's body. It was believed that if you are not able to hide your absences to the toilet from the rest, then you are a weak and ill-mannered person. That is, even when the religiosity of society was declining, and in the 19th century this was exactly the case. Natural processes were still considered disgusting. The feeling of shame has not gone away. By the way, toilet humor works on the same principle. A person is so ashamed of the actions of other people when they talk about how they had diarrhea during the exam that this awkwardness becomes ridiculous. That's why, for a long time it was believed that if there is no toilet theme in a comedy, then this scenario can be drained into the toilet. But in addition to the moral side of the issue, there has always been another, technical side. In fact, people not so long ago got the opportunity to retire in their cozy bathroom. When the first people began to unite in large settled communities, cities began to appear at the same time. And just imagine a lot of people, life is in full swing, trade is going on, but there is one big problem. What to do with such a huge amount of crap? Of course, you cannot bother and crap wherever you want. The main thing is not at home. But quickly enough it became clear to people that in addition to an unpleasant smell, epidemics begin due to unsanitary conditions. Life in such a city becomes deadly. Then one of the most important inventions of mankind appeared, sewage. In simple terms, sewerage is a system for supplying water to a person and disposing of waste products. In fact, sewerage and civilization are synonymous. One without the other is impossible. The real masters of sewage were the Romans. They carried out sewerage to the city in the era of the kings before the formation of the Republic. They named their system a big cloaca and it is still in operation. This is how it looks next to one of the bridges on the Tiber embankment. The Romans in general were surprisingly preoccupied with the toilet theme. They even came up with the sewer goddess Cloacina. Then they decided to optimize it and combined it with the goddess of love Venus. Sewerage and love. How do you like this combination? But it is even more difficult to imagine a god of excrement and manure. And the Romans had him and his name was Stercucius. He was constantly mocked by the early Christians. They said, "How can you believe in something so vile?" Thanks to a powerful sewage system, the Romans deployed a system of public toilets throughout the city. These were halls with very long benches in which there were special openings. By the 2nd century AD, there were almost 1,500 such toilets throughout Rome, which could accommodate up to 50 people at the same time. A little earlier, I said that the Romans were not at all embarrassed by group defecation. Moreover, they turned public toilets into places for discussing the most important issues and even managed to conclude deals there. No discomfort and shame, just business. By the way, one catchphrase is associated with public toilets. Emperor Vespasian once decided to tax toilets. When he was told that it was wrong to collect money from important strategic sites, he raised a coin to his nose and said the following: "Money does not smell." Another interesting fact is that when the inhabitants of Rome wanted more privacy, they preferred night potions of clay. But then a stratification appears in society. It was important for people which pots to fill. Wealthy citizens had vessels for urine from silver and gold. and Roman law even regulated how these pots would be inherited. When the Roman Empire broke up, Europe forgot about sanitation. Public toilets have become rare and sewage gradually came into desolation. People got the legal right to defecate where they would like to. Chronologically dark centuries lasted from the 5th to the 15th century, but in terms of hygiene it is even worse. Normal sewers were not in flesh until the 19th century. How did people live in such conditions? The answer is simple. In large cities of the most developed countries there were paved avenues and drains for sewage were dug up on the sides. That is, open cesspools ran in a thin strip parallel to the road. People could shit right on the street of their beloved city. But most were a little more civilized and did it at home. After all, pots survived the fall of Rome. Feces people were tritely poured out the window. By the way, hats beloved by many with wide fields appeared not only as a means of protection from the sun but also from impurity. After all, in such a hat if a charge in the form of feces flies from the window, then the chance that he will fall on your face significantly decreased. And in France at this time they come up with shoes with a very high heel, so as not to scoop up everything that was raised from the windows to the street. Perhaps you thought that only commoners did this and all sorts of dirty. And where then did the feces go? In the luxurious castles of the feudal lords? But there was no sewage in the castle of the sewer either. In terms of bowel movements of the Middle Ages everyone was equal. The choice was not big. The feudal lords or went to the pot or immediately a direct hit from the fortress wall of the castle. All waste drained either to the near castle town or in the moat. Needless to say, the moat with a characteristic aroma was an extremely effective means of protecting against potential enemies. There were other tricks. Sometimes a giant cesspool dug under the castle floor. On the one hand it was convenient, but on the other hand incidents are possible. For example, there was such an emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, Frederick Barbarossus. So during one of the receptions of the guests, the floor in the castle failed due to the fact that he could not stand the huge crowd of people. The noble guests along with Barbarossa himself found themselves in the ears and shit, and even more than the ears. The depth of this pit was about 10 meters. The emperor managed to save, but several dozen guests accepted the heroic death in this pool of feces. By the way, in the end Barbarossa still drowned, but not in shit, but in the river. Those very beautiful feudal castles, contrary to myths, were the center of unsanitary conditions. In the chic Versailles, the king of the Sun Louis of the 14th had not a single toilet room. For the king they collected a special chair with a hole and a pot so that Louis could close his screen and do his business without leaving the hall. But the court ladies were more complicated. The 18th century is the era of magnificent dresses. Only so that such a dress was put on a lady, she had to wait a couple of hours. Now imagine how in the outfit of the rich bitch style and they needs to sit down to pee. That's why, the ladies needed help. Gallant cavaliers brought their ladies to the pots, then they lifted their skirts and helped to sit so that the ladies would not miss and did not fall on the floor. Turn this pot. The population of the planet grew. The waste was becoming more and more and it was necessary to solve something. London in the mid-19th century not only suffocated from the factory smog but drowned in impurities. The growth of the population from 1 to 3 million over 50 years led to the fact that the frail sewage of London could not stand it. All waste merged directly to the Thames. Progress simply ignored the toilet sphere. Just compare the volume of pumping in London of the 19th century and the volume of pumping of ancient Rome. In the 1st century BC, a big cloaca filed a per capita of about 1,400 liters per day. In London the figure was 6 times smaller and was 232 liters. But the long-awaited breakthrough has come. Finally, the first toilet appeared, invented by Thomas Crapper. Access to this miracle of technology remained limited and most people continued to use pots all the same. As a result, London and other capitals of the world began to shake the constant epidemics of cholera. From this disease tens of thousands were dying. Doctors were alarming. The city could simply be saved from the permanent plague, and this was done by Dr. Snow. Real John Snow was not any bastard as some sources say. His father was a simple coal holder. During the London epidemic of 1853, Snow guessed that it was not a disgusting smell and illness, but feces poisoning drinking water. In those days, even in the most developed cities of the world, drinking water and sewer flows were not normally divorced. It was thanks to the discovery of John Snow that these flows finally divorced and the toilets with a plumb began to gain popularity. The toilet paper had its own way to success. Modern rolls appeared in Germany in the late 20s. Moreover, if it were not for the skills of the creator of Hans Klenke marketing, they might not have taken off. Even at the beginning of the 20th century, people experienced shame and were even shy about buying toilet paper. And in order to overcome the psychological barrier, the Klenke launched an advertising slogan: "Demand our rolls and you will not have to pronounce toilet paper aloud." And it worked. Let us return back to Roman public toilets for a minute if you do not mind. There is one point about which I did not say. In these toilets there was no division into male and female. There was another separation: class. If the poor had just holes, then for the rich stone slabs heated special slaves in advance. And here the question arises: where did the division into men's and women's toilets even come from? And why did this not worry about anyone before? Let us again recut the Christian concept of shame. The contemplation of the naked bodies of representatives of the opposite sex, with the exception spouses of course, is strictly condemned. The desire to divide the male and female world everywhere wherever possible becomes an important element of Christian civilization. In the Middle Ages, the problem with public toilets was solved by itself. There are no toilets with sewage, no problem. But by the 18th century, the situation begins to change dramatically. In 1739 a new product was shown at one Paris ball. These were public chamber toilets divided by gender. Next to the booths were special servants who showed where to go depending on your gender. To say that the people were surprised from such an action is to say nothing. It was something so new, eccentric and even cheerful. The people of the Enlightenment simply could not understand why to distinguish between the space in the toilet. But then it was only an experiment. And only 100 years later the World Exhibition passed. In fact, it was the championship of leading countries in inventions and architecture. Britain put a crystal palace there, a giant building made of iron and glass. The palace has not been preserved to this day, but the London Football Club, Crystal Palace, perpetuated its name. The palace was noteworthy that inside there was a real exotic, namely a public toilet with a division for men and women. The Victorian era in England secured this most important moral norm. But other trends also began to gain strength, including those associated with biology. A person began to be perceived as an animal that is not very different from other mammals. A man began to be considered a predator, and a woman who needs protection with a weak creature. Such views became the mainstream of the mid-19th century, and as a result the process of limiting female labor began. Women then began to ban certain types of work. But at the same time for women they decided to come up with a place where they could be alone with them and put themselves in order. These places have become a female toilet. Moreover, women have less and less agreed to the role of keepers of the hearth and more wanted to work. It was the output of women from under the role of a housewife that led to the appearance of female spaces. A working woman needed her place to refer to the nature calls. The sexual division has stopped logically inevitably. Thus, the main reason for the creation of the classic doors of the toilet with the letters M and F was precisely a change in the role of a woman in society, not Christian morality. Time shows that the attitude to the defecation process is changing from the era to the era. The process of the gender revolution launched in the 60s was also liberated by other spheres. People began to relate to their body and his discharge more calmly. Who knows, maybe the ancient body culture awaits us again. There is a chance that toilet humor will remain popular only in children. But now neither you nor me can still deny himself laughter in jokes about shit. In the end this is the little that makes everyone equal. Well, if after watching this video you still don't feel like going to the toilet, then I recommend that you watch another interesting story.